Thank you so much. Doing great. Thank you.
Good. I'm glad. So I guess we can start with the questions. I'll jump right into the first question, which is so assessing performance can be challenging in the tech industry. So, what are some effective ways for software engineers to measure their progress and ensure they're on the right track for growth and improvement?
Great. So that's definitely a great question. It's not trivial. So I'll start with the trivial solutions and then move on to more complicated options. So first, a prerequisite. In case you're still a student, try to get involved in a real project. Now, that might not be easy, but sometimes jobs allow you to get internships or maybe even side projects or part-time jobs, and it's really, really different working on a personal project versus working on something real. It really helps you get in the rhythm. So real product with customers, product managers, it's a whole different ballgame. So that'll definitely help you understand where you're from, where you are, compared to a personal project. Now, once you're in your role, once you do land a job, and you will, my best piece of advice would be to talk to your manager about it. Now, that said, most of the engineers on my team never talk to me about their career goals. I have to really put in my efforts to convince them to talk about it. Now, not all managers will do that, as it's a lot of work. But it is much easier for a manager to help you if you come to them and tell them, hey, please give me feedback. How am I doing? Am I doing great? What are my weak spots? Those are really useful questions to ask. They may sound trivial, but unless you ask them, your manager might not tell you until it's too late. So go to them and really ask them to help you construct a plan to make sure you're making progress. Now, you also need to measure your own progress, right? So a manager can be really helpful, and some of them might really turn out to be great mentors. I had a great mentor as my first manager, really helped me get the hang of things much quicker compared to other teammates who didn't have a mentor. So it's really useful, but you still have to do your own progress, your own work. And that has to do a lot with self reflection, which we'll cover in the next questions. But a few good questions to continuously ask yourself are you being challenged? It's okay to do routine tasks. There are a lot of them. Not everything is super flashy and interesting. That's okay. But if you can't think of a project to make you actually think, sit down and think about it through in the past month or even quarter, it's time to ask yourself why. Now, why aren't you doing interesting projects? There are a few possible reasons for that. One of them is you're just not ready. So if you're just beginning your career and you're in your first months or even year or two of work, you probably wouldn't get the most complicated projects, and that's okay. You need to earn that. You need to continuously learn, and with time, you'll be giving more complicated projects. So that's fine. However, if you are ready and you feel like you should be getting more interesting projects, it might be hard to admit, but you ask yourself, are you doing a good job with the routine tasks? So, for example, one of the engineers works under me is a great engineer. He's super smart, but he's not delivering on time most of the time, usually because he's not very interested in some of the tasks he's doing. Now, it's a business. We all have tasks that are not super interesting to us, but we need to deliver. So, since he doesn't deliver on the basic stuff, we can't really rely on him to deliver on the big projects. So, inadvertently, he actually gives himself a harder time because of it. So, ask yourself really, are you delivering on time, even the basic stuff? And if not, try to get feedback. Well, I mean, is there a reason you're not getting those tasks? Is there something you can do better? Is that time management or other reasons that might cause that? So always look and ask for feedback, especially when it's hard. It's not fun for your ego, but it will make a big difference in your career. And ego is the enemy, anyway. So another reason might be if it's just not enough new projects in your team. Some teams are maintenance teams and they do mainly routine tasks. So again, talk to your manager about it. Be proactive. Your manager will probably keep doing things as they are unless you talk to them. So do. And you might be able to switch teams. You might even move to a different role in your company. Um, Always try to move within your company instead of looking for a new role straight away. I mean, sometimes you have no option, but it's always better if they know you already. They can help you find a better fit. It's always a good idea. So that was a big tangent, but I'm just going to remind you real quick. This was under the bracket of, am I being challenged? Now, the second question is, do you have a plan? Now, it's really hard to make progress if you're not sure where you want to go. So, do you want to make progress as an individual contributor, like from a junior, mid-level, senior engineer, staff engineer, et cetera, or do you want to move into management? Now, there are some overlaps. Usually, an engineer starts as a junior, mid, senior engineer, then they move into management, but not always. And those different tasks require different skills. So you got to have a plan. And a good way to get inspiration, in my opinion, is books. And I have two books to recommend in that regard. One of them is The Manager's Path, which I found really useful as a manager. It's by Camille Fournier, I think. A very, very well-known book. And the second book is If You Want to Progress as an IC, which also very valuable. As a friend who's a staff engineer recommended to me, is The Staff Engineer's Path by Tanya Riley. So both great books, and they help you really understand first how managers and ICs think, and how that progression might look like from really junior engineer until the higher levels. So roughly, I'd say get feedback from your manager and continuously ask yourself, are you making progress? If not, get feedback. If not, and you're not getting feedback, try to look maybe for a different team. And again, worst case, this role or company might not be a good fit, but again, that's probably the last option. So I think that's about it for this one.
And like when being proactive, like speaking to your managers and asking feedback, do you think how many feedback, I think like a year, would you recommend? I don't know, talk to your manager. Like how
So
many times or how often, I guess.
that's a solid question. So most of your managers will probably have scheduled one-on-ones. I mean, I'm not aware of a manager who doesn't. So you probably have a one-on-one with your manager about once a week, once every 2 weeks. Usually that's the standard. So that's a good time to check in. Obviously, you won't always have feedback. We're doing the same task for a week, probably won't have any considerable feedback. But yeah, try to actually ask for it. So because some managers, it's not super comfortable to come to a person and say like, hey, you're not doing a great job. But if the person asks for it, sometimes the manager says, okay, they actually ask for it. I got to tell them something, which might open up a conversation and be useful. So always be proactive. It's tough. It's tough and it's inconvenient, but it's really important. And not a lot of people do it, but those who do get really good results.
Okay, perfect. Thank you.
No problem.
Okay, so the next question is adaptability and the growth mindset are essential for staying relevant in the tech landscape. So, how can software engineers develop these traits, and what strategies can they use to continuously adapt to new technologies and methodologies?
Awesome. So that's something I'm super passionate about. I mean, in my studies, I did a computer science degree, a psychology degree. So something I really find interesting. The notion of a growth mindset versus a fixed mindset. Now, again, probably my best recommendation, I also like books, is the book Mindset by Carl Dweck. It's probably the best well-known book about mindset and growth mindset in particular. But since books are long, I'm going to still describe it in a nutshell. So some people believe their traits are fixed. That is, sometimes it's good. Like I was always smart. I'm just good at math. Not a lot of people think that, but some people do. And some bad things might be, I'm just bad with numbers, or I'm just not good at sports. It's just mine for a long time. Now, the problem is, if it's who you are, if that's what you believe, you can never improve, right? If you're smart, you're smart. If you're dumb, you're dumb. It's fixed. Now, the sneaky thing here is, even if you believe something good about yourself, like you believe you're smart, research finds that kids who are being told they're smart from a young age tend to avoid contradicting that query. So a kid who's being told he's smart will probably avoid challenges because they might contradict his notion of being smart, which obviously leads to subpar performance, right? Because they would never challenge themselves and eventually won't fulfill their potentials. So because of that, it ends up bringing progress. So that's a fixed mindset. Even if it's the good things, it will hinder your progress. If it's bad things, obviously, right? If you think you're bad at math and you never go to university because of that, it's obvious. Now, a growth mindset is a whole different ballgame. It's about understanding brain plasticity. Now, you can improve at pretty much anything. Now, that's it. You probably won't become an Olympian at everything, okay? Some people are blessed with genetic capabilities and some are not. But you can get better, even much better, at a lot of things. And that's a good mindset to have at work. And that's the notion of a growth mindset. It's about reminding ourselves that all of us, really all of us, have the capability. And again, I know personally of stories of people who barely graduated high school and are now doing a PhD in neuroscience and AI. So again, it's all about mindset. And the best way I found to develop a growth mindset after understanding the concept is to take small challenges slightly outside of your comfort zone. So, for example, say you read about Rust, okay, a promising new programming language. Now, it's a tough one, so don't challenge yourself to write a chatbot with it. It's probably best reserved for Python. Challenge yourself to spend an hour reading it and starting a small project. Might as well begin a low world one. Now, the good thing about small challenges is that they're easy. You get a good feeling of, hey, I did something I didn't expect to do. And usually, if you start small, you get momentum. And then, if you do a hello world project in Rust, you're probably thinking, you probably won't end there. You're probably saying, what if I could, I don't know, set up an API? And then you'll go from there and suddenly you know Rust, which is something you might have thought of as impossible. And another good piece of advice is to really try and understand things. Now, say you're in a new job and they use Scrum methodology, which is really common. Try and actually understand what Scrum is, why it's used, and what are the alternatives. So a lot of people hear about Scrum, so hey, I know Scrum or sprints and stuff, but do you really understand it? And most of the things we know the name of them, but we don't really understand. There's a famous Richard Feynman quote about it. So knowing the name of something doesn't mean you understand it. And it's an important distinction to make. So do you really understand things? And a good method, again, by Richard Feynman, is to try to explain it to a 5-year-old. Can you explain Scrum to a 5-year-old? And if you can, you probably understand it. Cool. So another piece of advice is, again, something I mentioned earlier, is to leverage mentorship. Again, nothing will make you better faster than a great mentor. Many companies have a mentorship program, which is great, and it's really useful. We have it in our company. But you can also seek mentorship outside of work. Again, there are many ways. Probably not a good idea to say, hey, can you be my mentor? Because that's a little alarming. But feel free to actually, if you're seeing something interesting, that may be a YouTube video, an article, or something you found interesting and really you want to connect with the writer, just say, hey, I found this really useful. What do you recommend as a junior engineer to, et cetera, et cetera. And you can build a relationship that way. Another way, if you don't feel comfortable doing that, is actually going for paid mentorship. And very few, if you Google them, you just software engineer mentorship or something along those lines, you'll find. I know there are about 3 or 4 ones. And that's another option. And again, I would definitely go this route, especially for on just beginning, because it really makes a great difference. And I personally see the difference between people who had mentors at the beginning of their path and people who didn't. And it's a world of a difference. Now, my third piece of advice, verse 3, is to remember this one truth. Everything is easy once you understand it. Now, in my career so far, I stumbled upon a lot of stuff that I didn't understand and seemed like dark magic, especially DevOps for that matter. But eventually, after a lot of work that didn't come easy, it started to make sense. Now, even things I thought are totally dark magic, like DevOps and Kubernetes and stuff that sounds super complicated, once you understand them, it all seems simple. Because eventually people spend a lot of time trying to figure out how to make this simple and intuitive. It was for them. So it's just a matter of getting the prerequisites right. And once you understand things, they're all easy. So you got to remember this, and it sounds simple, but it'll really make a huge difference. Everything is easy once you understand it.
Yeah. Yeah, I need to remember that as well. Okay, so taking initiative and challenging the status quo are important for driving innovation. And how can software engineers cultivate a mindset that encourages initiative? And what are some practical ways they can contribute to innovation within their teams or organization?
Cool. So, in a few words, be curious but respectful. I'll start with a story. We have a great engineer in my company who's very experienced. He has probably 30 years of experience, super smart, but um, he tends to start fires over small issues because he doesn't look things too deeply, and it pisses people off. So it's great, and he has a lot of good stuff he says, which is useful. But it's really important to be respectful, especially when you're new to the code base and you come like, "Hey, what is this crap you're doing?" So usually there's a reason. Now that reason might not be good. That reason might not be relevant. If you're coming to a code base, usually it's a few years old, and things might have made sense a few years ago. Now they don't. So always be respectful, but stay curious because we had a few examples of people new to the code base who came and asked, "Why do you do this?" And sometimes we had good answers, sometimes we didn't. And it actually led to a few improvements in our databases and backend services. So, and those people were rewarded for that. So definitely be curious, definitely ask questions, respectfully though.
Yeah.
And another tip in that matter, so try to do the work. So if you're finding something, try to really spend some time understanding it and really making sure you understand the whole picture. So a lot of people find stuff and we don't really make sense, and we don't talk to people about it, and they say, "Hey, this doesn't make sense." But if they dig a little further, they understand a few other connections and caveats, and then figure out it's not an issue. But again, don't be afraid to be curious and ask questions. It's always a good idea as long as you're respectful. So that's that. Now, that's regarding code and actually, things you can improve in your databases, backend, etc. But you can also innovate processes. So, for example, I work in a startup, and we didn't have a process to handle bugs. I mean, yeah, we open tickets in Jira or whatever is a ticket management platform, but it took time to respond. And many engineers didn't notice them because engineers apparently don't like working with Jira or email, they like Slack. So I suggested, hey, why don't we have a Slack channel for that? So yeah, we still have tickets. We have, everything is documented, all good. Product manager's happy. But if we have something which is really urgent or even really small, why don't you just, Slack about it? Engineers, they look at Slack anyway in their breaks. And it really led to really quick bug resolution and good for conversation. Sometimes we figure out a bug. It's not a bug, it's a feature. But it's really useful. And again, it's a simple process. Just saw something, suggested an option based on the psychology of engineers, and it
Mhm.
worked. It was really useful. So again, innovation might not just be code; it might be processes, and processes are really important.
Yeah.
So that's that. And another way to innovate is to read widely. Again, books, but it might also be articles. Obviously, books are great and they're more in depth, but articles are usually more recent and talk about more recent innovations. I also find YouTube videos useful. Again, it depends how you study best, but YouTube videos might also be really useful. Some recommendations that in are Byte Go. It's a really good channel. They go in depth on a lot of things. Fireship, which is really familiar. It's more entertainment, but yeah, that person still talks about a lot of interesting things. So I'll still give it a watch. At least it's interesting. And these channels, articles, etc., will give you exposure to new ideas in your realm, which will be relevant to your work. And I even have an example. So I also read in Medium, and I read a great article about using UUID v7. So UUID, so usually an ID for various things, usually totally random because you don't want it to be predictable. So cybersecurity threats, etc. And that UID v7 is not totally random. It's random enough, but it also includes the event's time. Now, implementation is negligible. It's probably like, I don't know, an hour of work, but it's it sped up our database by 50%. It's super, super impactful, and it's just something I read. It's like, hey, you can do that, and we start implementing it, and it's useful. So again, you can read something which sounds cool, suggest it, and it might just make a really big difference in production. So definitely a good idea.
Yeah, I think reading is also part of the be curious tip, right?
Totally,
Yeah.
totally, totally. And again, reading is great, but if you don't like the digesting information in text, YouTube videos, we have YouTube videos about anything, Udemy, etc. Definitely leverage that. Whatever makes sense for you, whatever you find useful.
Yeah. Perfect. And then for the last question, I think also it's going back a little bit to your answer for the first question, is self reflection and deliberate practice are key to personal and professional growth. So, can you share some of these techniques that have been particularly effective for you and your team?
Sure. So something I've been doing for a while, and also recommend my engineers do. Now, not all of them do it, but some of them do, since it's tough. Is the daily reflection.
Mm.
So it's really powerful, but not trivial to do. It should only take a few minutes, and it's best if you do it at the end of your workday. Simply ask yourself a few questions. A few examples might be, what went well today? So it's always good to remember the positive stuff. And then what didn't go so well and why? I mean, maybe that could be I spent a little too much time on that task. I was a little distracted today, and maybe that says, hey, maybe I should. I don't know. A lot of people come to the office on Tuesdays. Maybe I should work from home so I could get more job done. Yeah, it's another option. And actually, what can you do about it? So the good stuff, less good stuff, and action steps. It should take a few minutes. And it's really useful if you do it day by day because you just don't remember things after a week or more. And in case you can't do that, the weekly reflection is the next best thing. Same idea, you can go more in depth. It's a little hard because you don't remember everything, but it's still really good. And you can get a high level overview, or are you making progress in our goals? So did you do anything that stretch you? And did the past week have any tasks that actually you actually found hard and you learn from them or not? And that relates to our things we talked about in the past, which is always to try and gauge where you are. Are you
Mm.
making progress? Are you taking interesting projects or not? Are you doing routine tasks or not? And using these reflections, you can devise a plan to improve your weak spots. So a very common thing I see, especially junior engineers, I was one like that as well, is being a little too reckless. So you want to deliver quickly. So you skimp on testing your code, you brush it off, and you end up introducing totally preventable bugs again and again. And again, you're delivering fast, but not of great quality. And the solution is to always remind yourself, hey, I need to slow down. And sometimes slowing down really helps you speed up. It's an important phrase to remember. Definitely told this myself a few times. And just really quickly, I found checklists really useful. So if you find that you do things like repeated errors, like again being a little reckless or forgetting to add tests or forgetting to re-review your PR before sending it, it's great to have a checklist. Doctors use them, pilots use them. You could use checklists as well. And real quick, I can go about a checklist I have, which is usually always plan. So when you want to implement a feature real fast, you say, yeah, I know what I want to do. But even if you spend like a minute, just a minute planning it, you always come up with new things you forget. So always plan, just step one. And obviously, if there's a design, you already have a plan, but always plan, include a test plan, which is also something we forget. If you think about it through before you implement, you tend to have remember edge cases better. Implement, test the code manually, always a good thing. So you might add automation tests, depends on if you have QA or not, but always validate your code manually. A lot of people say, hey, I wrote tests, the code works, but usually your code affects a few other systems, a few other backend services, etc. It's always good to check the end-to-end flow. Obviously, if you have automation for that, that's great. But if you don't, always do a manual sanity test and prepare your PR. And that's another cool step. Review your PR yourself before you send it to your peers. So a lot of times, you prepare a PR, you think you're through. because you looked at your code for a few hours or days, and then you send it to someone and say like, hey, well, what are all those debug logs? What are those comments? And what are those dead pieces of code? And if you stop, grab a cup of coffee, and come back to your PR a few minutes later, you see it, you go through it again, and then you send it to your peers. It usually is much, much, much more effective.
Yeah. Something that we do also at Amsterdam Tech with the students and also with the staff is these stand-ups, which is like the daily reports that you said. We do it every 2 weeks. Like, what are your blockers? What did you do this week? How did you do it? What are you doing next week? So this is also good to keep on track. And
Yeah, 1%. Again, we have it as in Scrum. We have retro meetings and dailies, etc. But often these processes, it's very hard to do them well, and a lot of people just want to go through them. So it's also good to have a process by yourself.
yeah,
So
yeah. I think that's it for my side, for my questions. Do you have anything you want to add?
it's a good question. I think I mentioned most things, but again, probably the key points is be curious, always be curious. Read widely, read or watch videos, again, or whatever works for you. And don't be afraid to innovate respectfully. And remember that final phase, which I remind to myself as well. Everything is easy once you understand it. And you can understand pretty much anything with enough work and the right guidance. So don't give up. Again, the fixed mindset doesn't work. It's not truth. And if you believe you can do it, you usually can. Again, you might not be an Olympian, you might not be the best software engineer in the world, but you can get much better. And that's something you should remember.
Okay. And then other two key points as well that I remembered is find a good mentor and also ask for feedback. So
Yeah, 1%. 1%. Feedback. Again, sometimes your manager will give you feedback, but my experience is people don't ask for feedback, and managers don't like to give feedback because sometimes they find it offensive. They don't want to hurt anyone. But if you ask for feedback, you will probably get it, and you'll be better off.
okay, perfect. Okay, then thank you so much, Guy, for coming and giving us
Thank you
tips.
for having me. Thank you so
Thank
much, and
you.
good luck, everyone.
Nice to see you. Bye.
Thank you. Bye bye.